The chair recognizes the honorable member for St.Annes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to give my contribution on this motion by our great leader, Michael Pintard, for the appointment of a select committee. For the appointment of a select committee on immigration and the matters that he addressed. I've just heard my former boss, Wayne Monroe, gentleman from Freetown, talk about time. Time is precious, and we must value the time of members of the Royal Bahamas Defense Force. Madam Speaker, if you look in the rule book, our rules of procedure, there's 7 pages dedicated to debate. Now, if you ask me as a young parliamentarian, the only productive thing we do as parliamentarians is come into this House debate. But there are 8 pages, Madam Speaker, dedicated to select committees and the role of select committees and the powers of select committees. 8 is greater than 7, Madam Speaker. There is a far greater task that we as parliamentarians have when we've been elected to this office than simply debating. And why, Madam Speaker, we have not been doing this as a matter of greater habit is surprising to me. But a year and 2 months in, I'm still in the surprise stage. But I'm not, Madam Speaker, in the accepting stage. And I don't think that, as the Prime Minister has commented to members of the public today, he is not in the accepting stage either. He is not, Madam Speaker, in the stage of accepting what he described as a practice of avoiding question time. He actually went, Madam Speaker, in a press release and said the following about the importance of the opposition. He said, Madam Speaker, the Davis administration recognizes the important role of the opposition in promoting transparency and accountability. By giving the opposition the ability to bring significant topics to the forefront of legislative debate, we uphold the democratic values and appreciate the opposition's role in parliamentary democracy. Now, Madam Speaker, if this is in fact the position of the Davis administration, there should be no objection from any one of the members on the opposite side today to the appointment of the proposed select committee. Now, I know there's some uncertainty raised about how long it's going to take. That can all be determined. That can even be extended according to the rules, Madam Speaker. I know that there's an issue, well, we can't be calling people to report to Parliament because they have better things to do. Well, we in Parliament have better things to do, and that is work when we're on the people's time. Half of our responsibility is to address legislation. The other half of our responsibility is to address how that legislation and how the policies we have in our respective ministries is being felt by members of the public. Now, Madam Speaker, if you look at Rule 19.4, this is under the subheading, the House Rules and Business Committee. By 19.4, the committee shall be responsible for assigning the oversight of government ministries and departments to the relevant joint and standing committee. That means every ministry, Madam Speaker, should have a committee assigned to it. It's not just a point where I think has become the practice. You get elected, you look back in 5 years and determine where you are. The practice, Madam Speaker, according to our rules, is that you have a governing side, you have an opposition side, Madam Speaker, and you have members from each governing side reflectively represented in the committees. Each committee is to look at a ministry. It shouldn't even be a question of why are we doing this. We should have already been doing this over a year ago, Madam Speaker. We're actually a year behind in having a committee look into the Ministry of Immigration and the matters related thereto in the public interest. It's not to hold the member for Carmichael and his ministry accountable, Madam Speaker. It's for the people to hold us accountable to them. Madam Speaker, there's so many things that have been raised by our leader, and recognized. I think it's undeniable that the public is now interested in several factors, several aspects of the immigration problem in the Bahamas. To ignore the people's interests, Madam Speaker, and not support the Select Committee is turning our back on the people. We may have an established practice of putting things as we want them to be, as we think best, as our caucus, as our party determines they should be. But that's not how Parliament should be operating. The Parliament should have a select committee looking into things in the public's interest. Not only matters that we're dealing with today, but matters that could impact the policy decisions we make down the road. There are members of the public with expertise beyond the experience and expertise of members of this Honourable House of Assembly. How are we, as members of Parliament, listening to them? How are we letting them participate? How are we, as the People's Parliament, letting the people participate in Parliament? Again, a select committee gives certain powers, Madam Speaker, and a select committee can call witnesses that have experience in the areas that the committee is investigating. A select committee can actually even have members of the public come to the committee and give information to them that might set the trajectory of that select committee going forward. So while you see a number of categories listed by the honourable member from Marco City, there's good reason for that, Madam Speaker, because there are several items that are of extreme importance to the people of the Bahamas. We just had CARICOM here the other day, so obviously our government is willing to listen to foreign government heads. But how is the Bahamas government willing to listen to Bahamians? You can do it through these select committees, Madam Speaker. It's not an opposition committee, Madam Speaker. It's a committee made up of both sides of the House. And most committees I sit on right now, because the government, the Davis-Cooper administration, has a majority of the House, the majority of members of any particular committee are from the Davis-Cooper administration. So there's nothing for them to be concerned with, Madam Speaker, in approving a select committee. Outside of pressing issues, you can have select committees on transportation issues. You can examine reasons that there could be changes in policy going forward. You can have committees that are of national interest on green energy. These are things that parliamentarians can be doing, Madam Speaker, on days and at times that they're not sitting in this Honourable House of Assembly. It's not something creative. It's been created a long time ago, and I know this, Madam Speaker, because when I look at the back of this rule book, I see people like Tennyson Wells, like Nico Grant, Frank Smith, Pleasant Bridgewater. I see people like the Honourable Frederick Mitchell, who I think a number of years ago, maybe as far back as 91 or 97, came up with these rules from 2005, Madam Speaker. So these select committees are well set out in our rule book, which governs our time in the House of Parliament. To deny the appointment of a select committee on matters relating to immigration, which is probably the greatest national issue now, would be short-sighted, Madam Speaker. And there's no reason anyone should be concerned about a select committee being appointed. It'll be governed by both sides of the House. The majority, as I said, is likely to come from the Davis-Cooper administration side. What we do in those committees will ultimately be determined by a majority. The report comes from the chairman of those committees to Madam Speaker for consideration before the House. The information and the evidence collected, Madam Speaker, is under the decision and majority choice of the chairman of those committees. But, Madam Speaker, what we can't do is sit here in Parliament and turn our backs on the issues that are before the Bahamian people. And the biggest issue, as I said right now, Madam Speaker, is immigration. I strongly support the motion by the Leader of Opposition, the Member of Parliament from Marco City, just as I strongly support the member for Carmichael in his ministerial post as Minister of Immigration. We're on different sides, but we have one problem now before us to address as members of this Bahamian Parliament on behalf of the citizens of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. So I'm going to support this motion today, and I ask all of the other members of this House to do the same. There's nothing to lose when we're doing the right thing for our Bahamian people. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Honourable Member Asmani.